without further ado, I'd like to just quickly introduce our fellow panelists here. I'd like to just start with Andres. Andres is the director of applied AI from Vector Institute. He looks into AI governance. He's worked with plentiful of industry partners across the globe as well as in Canada. I also like to welcome Dr. Frank Rudzicz. Did I say that right? He's from Dalhousie University and also part of Vector Institute. He's also the director of Atlantic AI Institute and a whole bunch of exciting stuff. He's also an entrepreneur that has exited as well. Is that correct? Yeah. So we have Dr. Frank with us. Tony Sheehan. If you've seen him earlier, he's just presented at was it the atrium upstairs? And he's the co-founder and the CTO of NorthBound Advisory. And we have Shahzad. Shahzad is with us today from Deloitte, Canada, and he is a very trusted advisor in enterprise technology. And I think he's going to talk to us a lot about Helix, which is their healthcare product. He's also an AI strategist, and yeah, he did a lot of work in the regulated transformation environments as well. And Rich from TrojAI. He is the director of customer success. He's into red teams and he stress tests AI models pre and post deployment. And prior to this, he's also with IBM Security, and that's where I'm from. So now, without further ado, I'd like to start the panel. So I want to say that almost no organization at this stage, including the most sophisticated one, has actually documented your methodology for assessing whether people inside the organization actually trust or is comfortable with compliance as well as governance with the AI that is being deployed. That to me is not an ethics problem. I view it as an infrastructure problem in a greater detail. And infrastructure failures don't really announce themselves. They compound very quietly, and as we all know, it's going to be a very expensive fix. So I personally research trust in AI augmented decision making, and I myself is also a practitioner that has been watching this space for the many 20 years maybe. And I see organizations conflate into compliance posture with trust readiness. And I'd like to start the panel on their views into this discussion. So I'd like to start with Andres here. So your organization has deployed an AI system that has made consequential decision. A regulator, a client, and even your own board ask you to explain why the system was trusted. So who do you point to, and is that actually the answer?
Yeah, thanks. So that is a very broad question because I think there is a lot of elements that depend on the specific use case that you have in front of you. So there are elements around what type of technologies you're using, what type of impact you are expecting or anticipating. But the broad answer from my perspective is one, there is a risk-benefit analysis that is at the core of all of these problems. So definitely you need to be very much aware of what is going on in terms of the potential impacts, how you mitigate it. The other side of the question is around what are the processes that you have in place to actually build this type of infrastructure in a reliable way. Personally, my background is in the financial industry, so my bias is to go into the kind of the 3 layers of defense type of model that we have in the financial industry. So essentially what you have is the first line as the owners of the risk, and basically they are the ones that are in the business. It's typically 99% of the organization, if not more, but essentially it's people that are doing things. The second line is about who is challenging that people that are making those decisions, because there is biases. So whenever you are making decisions on your own, you're liable to end up falling for those biases traps. So the question is not necessarily about the specific thing that you did, it's about ensuring that that those things that you did are actually challenged and you are creating the right environment for making those decisions. And then finally, you have the third layer, which is typically the audit function. So the logic behind that is you want mechanisms for learning. So if something goes wrong, how do you go and build that feedback loop and essentially are able to understand what's going on? So depending on the type of organization, this can take different flavors, look different. But essentially, the core concept is you always have somebody that is very clearly accountable for things. So when you say, who do you point to in terms of, is this credible? That is something that it needs to be very, very clear. And whomever signed basically saying, yep, this is this machine is going to be doing this, that person should remain accountable. But then that accountability doesn't exist in the void. You should have mechanisms that provide a broader visibility. And then you should have the feedback loop to actually make you learn. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to hear from Shahzad. What is your opinion about this? And then we'll go around to Rich after that.
Okay, there you go. I thought red means stop. Okay. So before I start answering the question, I will relate that question to the product that we're building called Helix, and the name came from Heal. So it was a incumbent project at Humber River Hospital in Ontario that we took over and start building on top of it, and we make it multi-tenant. And we are already live with the two of the hospital and doing the UAT with 4 other hospitals. So coming back to Helix is it's basically an AI workflow safely deployed across healthcare. That's a tagline of Helix. What it means that we have an AI agentic layer that actually sit on top of your staffing, hospital staffing, scheduling, EMR, HSI system, and it actually make the life easier of staff, admins, or doctors to any of their administrative tasks, day in, day out, daily tasks. How they manage it and how we can automate those. So it's basically an automation of small to medium workflows. And so that's about Helix. And that's exactly the question or the anxiety that we got back from the hospital, especially on the CIOs, like how I can trust the app, but how I can say that the response that I'm getting is trustworthy, and what are the guardrails that you have. And there were a bunch of questions that we have been asked, and luckily we were able to answer most of them. That's why we call it is a compliant platform that has a bunch of apps. The very first the app that I will anchor on, we call it PolicyPal. And what it does, it's your IT policies or clinician policies. So whenever you have to have any question, instead of you reaching out and reading all those bunch of documents, some hospital has 500 policies, some has thousands. So instead of going each to all those policies because you can't remember by heart, so you can actually, we have a chat interface where you can ask the question and it gives you the response back. Now, how that response is accurate. So there are a bunch of guardrails that we have implemented that's basically going to answer that question. The first guardrail is like, the first of all, whatever the information that is being entered, it gets sanitized. So any information, any personal information that gets entered in the prompt, we actually rectify it. We de-anonymize it, de-identify it before it hit the LLM. That's the very first thing that we do. Second, the like I think all of you who has played with AI tools, you must have noticed if you ask a question, the first question you ask, you get a better response. And as you can see, when engine realize that it has gained your interest, like your trust, then it may hallucinate because it calms down. So you have to keep the LLM on your toes, on their toes, like how they're going to respond, and that's where you have to keep challenging them. Like we use some of the guardrails that provided by the hyperscalers, but we realize like after like we actually experienced that in one of our chatbot that I was talking about. After 4 or 5 prompts, when you gain the trust, you ask, okay, give me how I build the app, give me the script, and it actually gave the script. Like it's not meant to do that, but it gave the script. So that's how you need to sanitize before you hit the LLM. how you actually put those guardrails, check the prompts, and block the response back as well. So that's how we implemented those things. And another answer is to that, like, trust is not perfection. Trust is control. Trust is transparency, auditability. So how actually you can give all those mechanisms, how you have implemented them, and if something goes wrong, as far as you give the confidence that how we will rectify it, that's basically trust. Another important factor that I heard from Mark in his keynote, like, is trust start with understanding. If someone does not understand, they don't trust. And that's where you see lots of the adoption of AI coming, and the rules are getting lenient comparatively, because now we are developing the understanding. So that actually contribute to that. I know I'm giving a long answer, but just I will wrap it. One more thing. In addition to all the guardrail that we're talking about, we are also working on a POC, and that's another product beside Helix. It's called Trust Core, and that has 5 layers. So whatever the guardrail that we're talking about, those are mostly at the logic base, but now we are making it to the next level, which has 5 layers. The first layer is actually sanitize the information, make sure, like, and some of the aspect that it touched upon, it de-anonymize the data. It makes sure that if there is any sensitive question that you ask that are not ethical, you discard them, and then you build your own system prompts along with the user prompts. Then the second layer we have is around picking the golden source. So in the use case that I talked about for the policy pal, we have policies and procedures, but it could be any knowledge base. So based on the prompt, picking the right golden record that you need to feed to the LLM, that's important. So that's what the layer 2 does. The layer 3 does, like, because we going with the concept that LLM is going to be used as a narrator, not as your business logic, because that's where they hallucinate. So the third layer is actually work on all those calculation, confidence score, the prediction. It does all that, because that tie back to your logic, your use cases. So you zoom that in. So once you do all that sanitization and sensitization with those 3 layers, that's where you feed the data to LLM. And once you get the response back from the LLM, that's where the response is actually gets validated before it hit the user. And that's where it gets validated against your whatever we have produced in layer 1 and layer 2. It cross check with that context is still the same. Is it still answering what I ask? And there is a confidence score, there is a risk score, and there is an expectation. Based on the risk score and confidence score, whether you accept the result or whether you reject the result and you retry it. And then that's where you also determine, okay, if the results is not acceptable, then how I can loop in human to validate that if there is an exception, because sometimes you may not get the perfect answer, but it's related to yourself, that is it even giving you enough detail that you can actually take some action, so that the scene lies still lie with you. And then the last layer is still is basically more like a horizontal, that every action, every decision that is being taken across the board is traceable, auditable, so it get logged. Sorry, I gave a long answer.
Thank you, Shahzad. I'd like to hear from Rich, coming from the RIT teams and, what are his thoughts
Sure.
around that. And then we'll move to Tony.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I could echo certainly what's been said already, but I think what I'll do first, I'll explain what it is we do. So, TrojAI, we have a couple of products. One of them is called Detect, and it is a large language model. I'm going to say analyzer. We try and make it do things it's not supposed to do: hallucinate, data poisoning, all of the things that you see in the OWASP top 10. We try and make it do those things so we can fine tune it, fine tune the model before it hits production. Once production comes along, we have a inline AI firewall. So we're in between the end user and ChatGPT, Devin, Codex, all of those things, Claude, and we intercept every single prompt. And we analyze it with, all sorts of policies and rules to detect whether or not corporate information is being released. If there's a prompt injection attempt, and we can approve it, redact it, or flag it. And this is inline. So what I can do is I can give an example of how this is actually working in a Fortune 50 customer today. I can't tell you the customer. I can say most of you probably are customers of this customer. But I want to get back to the original trust comment as well. Trust never comes up in my conversations with this customer. It's called consequence management. So it goes back to risk analysis and how much risk are you willing to take on for a certain outcome. So there's a whole consequence management workflow, and it starts with, well, like I just said, we're working on fine-tuning the large language models. We have other clearly defined use cases. Most large enterprises are using a framework like NIST to kind of build their deployment strategy around it, the whole life cycle of the large language model. So, and some take chunks of it, partial, whatever. So this company does that, and they have a team of 40 people. They have 20,000 employees, a team of 40 dedicated just to LLM security. And we're right there in the middle with them, this little company out of New Brunswick, which is amazing. It's fun to play with these folks. It's exhausting because my phone has not stopped since I sat here. So, where was I? Okay, so what they do is I will work with their model review board. So before a model, I'm assuming all use cases have been identified for this customer. They've identified their use cases, which groups are going to use what agents and LLMs. It then goes to a model review board. And now before we can start intercepting traffic, we have to be certified. So we use AI to secure AI. So what we need to do is we need to prove to the model review board that our AI firewall solution and our AI detect solution meet certain standards. So we're not just throwing something at the wall and hoping it works. Otherwise, you end up with a lot of false positives or a lot of false negatives and a lot of unhappy end users. I mean, even if we had a 98%, and I was fighting this a couple of weeks ago, a 98% success rate, that's 2%, and that 2% translated to 15,000 times you had a false positive, which translated to 8,000 calls to their help desk. So it really does have an impact. 98% sounds great. I wish it was my French mark in grade 10, but it doesn't work well for LLM, So once we go through their it's called the MRMG process, most big organizations will have a model review board, and you get their data science team and our data science team will work back and forth to prove that our model it meets the requirements for this customer, that it meets accuracy and all that stuff. And it doesn't stop there. We have to also prove that we are working with the customer on fine-tuning that as we use it, because you put it out there, humans are involved. It's not going to work the way you expected it to work. So we're constantly getting feedback, and someone mentioned feedback earlier. We're always adjusting and fine-tuning our models. And then it goes through the whole life cycle, and then there's a human in the middle. So yes, we do red teaming, we do auto red teaming, but on the firewall side, there's a lot of things we're just not sure on. So the customer won't block, they'll maybe pass it through, but a lot of the times they flag prompt conversations for analysis later. And they have a team of people that just simply go through prompts that were questionable and then determine whether or not this is a real hack attempt or it's just a poorly written prompt. And then it goes back to, much would be following this, back to the govern cycle, and that's educating the user base who are using this on how to use the tools. What constitutes a well-written prompt? What you shouldn't be putting up there. I mean, we've seen internal code from this customer just flying through into Claude and Codex, and it shouldn't be doing that. And so a lot of it is around the human side, a human at the end validating anything that's questionable, and then analyzing that after, and the constant feedback loop, risk always being assessed. And I think the big thing is the trust really isn't there. If there was trust, you wouldn't need all these things. So the trust is there to give you a certain amount of, confidence. But I would say the entire thing revolves around consequence management, and you need to be ready to act when something doesn't go as planned. And that all comes back to having a proper framework in place and enabling your user base to use the tools properly, if that makes sense. But that's actually happening today, like right now.
Thank you, Rich. Let's hear from NorthBound.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so as Rachel said, I work for NorthBound Advisory. Our customers are mostly small, medium business. The other hat I wear is I'm a CTO of a SaaS software company as well. So two perspectives. On the small, medium business side, it's very similar to what the panel's already said. You need to have some layer of defense in your company. Even if you're a small company, you need to have that. So we always start off with a small company to start with an AI policy, because you need to be intentional about your data, and you need to determine as an organization from the top down, like, what are we allowed to do with which classification of data? So we always start off with, what are your principles? And then what's your data classification? Very sensitive data, medium sensitive, and not so sensitive data. And then what am I allowed to put in the AI tools, which could be an LLM like Copilot, or it could be in one of the systems they use for their core business, like an ERP or whatever that has AI in it. And once you determine that, then you kind of roll it out to your employees with a change management plan and clear policy that's like digestible by them. It's no good to have an AI policy that was written for a SOC 2 or ISO auditor. That's not going to help people who are using AI to understand. So we find that once you get that all in place, that's only the first part, and then you need some line of defense, because the nature of some businesses are such that they're dealing with sensitive data. Imagine you're a contact center and you're taking in personally identifiable information, sometimes credit card information, or even more sensitive data than that. And even if you're not like typing it directly into the LLM, like there may be a transcript of a conversation you're having with a client where the customer may just like blurt it out or whatever. So there needs to be some layer of defense in place where you're sanitizing, like you're saying, that information before it gets in there. And so that's absolutely, and that needs to align with the policy you've laid out. If the data sensitivity for this activity is not matching what it should be, then you need to have layers of defense for that, right? It only makes sense. So even for small, medium business, not industrial strength use cases like healthcare or what TrojAI is doing for Fortune 50 companies, like it applies to everybody, I would say. So yeah, that's kind of it, Rachel, from my side.
Thank you, Tony. I like to hear now from Frank. What do you have to say? Coming from your different hats. From academia as well as industry.
So I jotted down 3 instances where we kind of were experiencing issues of trust with regards to AI deployment in AI and health, usually. I'm going to go through them kind of quickly. The first instance is many years ago. This is before AI was cool or whatever it is now. We had a group of students who were developing a tool that you basically talk to an app and it assesses for things like dementia and depression, anxiety, and so on. And we were getting really good results, and we're a bunch of computer scientists who had very little clinical expertise at the time, so we're trying to pitch to clinicians that this cool new app gets X% accuracy and so on. But they hadn't heard about AI. To them, it was science fiction. And they didn't know how it worked. So like our solution at the time was for trust, for gaining their trust, was to open up the system and to use explainable AI to show them these are the features of speech and language or behavior that the model is attending to. It kind of matches with your expertise, and then they kind of gained trust that way. Each of these stories has a yes but though, because at the time I was like explainable AI is the way that we're going to establish trustworthiness. But explainable AI is still kind of the Wild West. A lot of the techniques don't really work very well. Even when they do, there's still PEBCAC, where the problem exists between the keyboard and the chair, and the humans don't know how to interpret the results that the AI is showing them. So there's a big asterisk next to explainability as a means of providing trust, in my opinion. So a few years passed, and another set of students and a postdoc started a company on AI scribes. And the AI scribe, as you'd expect, uses an LLM to transcribe to make use of the transcribed speech. And we were deploying it in Ontario, and a lot of the sites were not comfortable using these closed API-based large language models that live in the States. So they wanted to build LLMs locally, and we were very happy to do that. Like open models, open source is a good thing. But that project was fine, and they were comfortable making sure that the data and the model stayed on site. But some of my current research at Dalhousie and the Vector Institute is about, well, these large language models. Sometimes guardrails are put up around them, but they're pretty easy to circumvent through clever prompting. If you have access to the weights, you can fine-tune them to, even if they've been trained to not be sexist or racist or have other problematic behaviors. Somebody who wants to use an open weight LLM to spread misinformation or whatever can fairly easily fine-tune it to regain that knowledge. So our research is about stopping that process. So the idea is, well, open source and local is the solution to gain trust, but yes, but there's problems with that as well. And then finally, in healthcare, private data is one of the most important aspects of safe, trustworthy deployments. One of the typical techniques for making models private is to apply this thing called differential privacy. I'm sure most of you have heard about that. Works very great, and there's theoretical proofs that kind of demonstrate that you can remove private information. But the problem is that when you remove demographic information from these models, the result is that the decisions made by those large language models that have been privatized or made more private, they can get worse performance for a variety of demographic groups, like women, people of color, people of different socioeconomic statuses, and so on. We're not the first group to show that. But again, our research at Dalhousie and the Vector Institute is on ways of trying to train differentially private models to with sensitivity to these groups so that they don't suffer changes in performance. So wrapping all those things together quickly, I think there's lots of solutions we have for all these problems. We have more explainability, open and local models, differential privacy and privacy preserving techniques. But there's all these caveats associated with all of them. And the moral of the story that I wanted to convey was, I think it's been a bit of a challenge because I think sometimes you're trying to get something deployed in healthcare where you want to make positive change, and you want to gain the trust of clinicians and patients and so on. And you say there's a solution that can solve some of these problems, explainability, differential privacy, and so on. But in the back of your mind, there's always these caveats to go along with it. And it's a bit of a tension because I kind of feel obliged to tell them, yes, there's all these other aspects to it. If you go deeper and deeper, it's not a simple checkbox. So the main moral of the story for me is that people deploying AI can't think of trustworthiness as just a bunch of checkboxes. We do explainability check, we do privacy check, and we're finished. There's a lot more to it than that, but they also have to not be scared of the lot more to it than that part of it.
Thank you. So I want to change the format a little bit because we kind of started a bit late, and I want the audience to also participate. But before we get into that, you've heard, all this description about how trust looks like from inside, from outside, from vendor, and, a perspective from regulator as well as academia. And I think I want to talk about a use case that actually happened 3 weeks ago, and then I then want the audience to actually participate after that. So 3 weeks ago, if you are aware, a Pizza Hut franchisee called the Jack Pizza had 111 locations across New York, and they actually filed a $100 million lawsuit against their own franchisor, and not because the AI actually failed at work, but because it worked exactly as it was designed. So the system was called Dragontail. It was a mandatory rolled out, and what it did was that it quietly and efficiently removed all the managers from the loop. All right. So before Dragontail, the managers controlled the flow. They decided when the order was ready, when the driver was going to pick it up, how the kitchen was ran, and after Dragontail took over, the algorithm decided on everything. Perfect. So deliveries under 30 minutes dropped by 50%. The rack time quadrupled. The sales actually grew over 10%. But you know what? After Dragontail came on board, it was negative 9.78%. All right, so Jack did not actually lose control of the system per se, but the system was on point, but they lost business, right? So I think the question here that I want everybody to ponder on is this a failure of explicability that we talked about? Nobody could actually see what the system was doing. Was it a failure of stewardship because the human was removed from the design? And was it actually outcome failure where, the mandate itself was actually the problem? And the answer is, I guess, who was actually accountable in this whole thing, right? And we got a question there. So I'm really going to change this format because I don't want everybody to just listen. I want everybody to ask our Fantastic Five. This is my panel here. I named them Fantastic Five. And I want to get this very, 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 very intimate, and it's going to be a dialogue. So can you just say your name and where you're from, and then you can come with your questions, and which particular panel would you like to target the question to?
I'm Chris Eaton. I'm from here in Fredericton. I work at SMB. Um, Actually, just a bit of extra explanation on that. One of the things that went wrong with this was that it actually worked exactly as intended. And it was actually the delivery drivers, like the DoorDash drivers, the Uber drivers, who realized that they could get, if they could see what's going on in this, they could bring 2 or 3 orders at the same time. And so they would make more money by doing that, obviously. But that meant that the first order waited a lot longer and it arrived cold. So I guess the question is, and I mean, this is for anybody who's interested in it, is that there's an effort there to say that, well, the system did something wrong, or the AI did something wrong, or the goal was malicious in some way. But is it more a case of what actually happened was nobody thought to bring one of the drivers in and say, what's going to happen when you can do this suddenly? Is that actually what happened here?
Thank you, Chris. So who wants to answer that?
Well, I have the microphone. So in my mind, this has very little to do with AI. I mean, in the sense that, yes, it was an AI application, but we've all seen lots of implementations of systems that have gone terribly wrong. I remember payment systems in the federal government not that long ago that was one of those kind of horror stories too. What I'm trying to say is I think that the gap here is AI requires a different paradigm, because it is not, even though you are coding, it's not the same type of code that you do when you are deploying your traditional IT. As a result of that, the governance mechanisms, all the guardrails that we've built for deploying deploying IT systems have blind spots, because they were never designed for this type of technology. The result of that is that we make mistakes that we wouldn't have expected necessarily in a traditional deployment, but it is not because these things are inherent to AI necessarily. It is because organizations don't necessarily know how to handle those things. One example that I keep coming back is business continuity. So if you look at any traditional, let's call it forecasting model, or forget about forecasting, any type of system, decision support system. If you have a change, let's say in regulation, or a change in behavior, so think of a pandemic, the predictions that you're going to get from that systems are going to be bad, right? So nothing to do with the current wave of AI, but again, you design the system for a certain problem. So how do you fix that? In the let's say 10 years ago, you go in, you look at your rules, you tweak with them, you change parameters, and you guess what is the right way to modify the system so it works correctly. When you have an AI system, the levers that you can play with are different. It is not necessarily harder or easier in one model or the other. Sometimes it's going to be one or the other, but the point is you need to do synthetic data, you need to do data set shift type of techniques. However, the problem is most organizations don't have the know-how to do those techniques. So it is not, again, inherent to the that one technology is better, quotation marks, than the other. It is just that you need different skill sets for one or the other. You need different processes to ensure that you are doing things the right way. So you need to prepare. And that is the thing that I think a lot of organizations don't necessarily think ahead of time, and they only discover that when they are in the front page of a newspaper.
Hello. So I think you summarize it really well. It's not an AI failure. It's basically the change management. And the overall ecosystem was overlooked in this case. And there could have been a simulation testing, all that stuff. And that's why it's very important that because whenever AI is just the theme over here, but it applies to any initiative that you take. It's a process. Like what is the current process and what the future process, and where the optimization needs to happen, and what will be the reaction all those stakeholders that are going to be involved. And engaging the stakeholders at the right time is very, very important. And running that simulation, engaging them, getting their reaction is very important. That's why there is a just along those lines, we have a tool called, we call it in Deloitte called Reimagine, and that's exactly what it does. It basically it helps you to envision the future process, that what it would look like. So you actually feed the current processes of any specific department, anything, and once you feed that, it runs through the logic behind the scene, and it gives you, based on the current process, what are the future optimization, where you need to enable AI, where you need to keep the human in the loop, what those, and it also can give you an idea of where you need to have different agents that can take over the role, and where you need to keep the human in the loop, and how the overall future process look like. And it may not be perfect, but at least it gives you enough idea that you can consider before rolling out any solution. So before you even start your journey, you have an idea what the future process would look like. So it's very important not just to enforce something right away. And for any bigger initiative, small initiative or bigger initiative, is very important to run a small pilot before you even do the big launch.
So, in my perspective, like Shahzad specified it very clearly that this is a change management issue. But overall, when we talk about any, even in the financial sector, a term is used that is a negative use case scenario, right? So, whenever you deploy any project, you need to prepare yourself for the unexpected as well. So this is an unexpected kind of a scenario, or something invalid happens. You need to prepare yourself for those scenarios, and this specific case highlights that most probably a negative use case scenario haven't been tested. So that's the reason that that happened.
Yeah, more a comment than anything, but I think it's something especially for larger enterprises when you're looking at end to end. Throughout your chain, you have to consider the impact. If you're increasing capacity at one end, are you creating bottlenecks at another? If you're not implementing AI all the way through.
Any more thoughts, discussions, ideas coming from the audience?
Hey, I'm Sam Brown. I'm a software developer at Smart Skin Technologies. We have an implementation of an AI sort of semantic. It's essentially providing some sort of like language to an end user whenever they are working through a problem set that I'm not going to get the details of right here. But one thing that we struggled with a lot was essentially we have a whole bunch of data sets that are tagged in individual ways, and it's basically just like, well, if you see these patterns in this data set, provide this sort of answer, but provide some sort of semantic coloring to it. My question is, do you guys have any experience with, in a situation where there's not enough data for the AI to actually make some sort of confident reading, to just say that instead of just kind of making something up kind of on the fly?
So answer is no. So, I think when we talk about any prediction modeling, is 80% data, 20% is your code or logic. So it all ties back to the data. And the more data you feed, the right data that you feed, that's where the accuracy and the permutations comes into play. Otherwise, it's very hard to do that. So the short answer is no. And like we are actually working on one of the prediction modeling as well for the emergency department to predict the vacancy to help the patient better. But the biggest struggle that we have the right code, we run the pilot, but are we certain that the accuracy will be there, etc.? It all tie back to the different permutation, and that's where those whole data drifting comes into play. Because if you look into the data before COVID, or if you look at the data after COVID, it's a huge change. Like the prediction will totally change. So that's why data is the key.
So I want to remind everybody that we need to use the microphone, whoever is going to be speaking, because our fellow audience at the other room is not able to hear us. So I apologize for that. Um, Sorry.
Sorry, I just want to add one thing that not a complete solution, but the type of things that I've seen people using to handle this is interpretability type of tools when they are looking at, for example, what are the areas that were activated of the network. Because if you have some intuition um, on what are the areas that would be relevant, sometimes you see patterns in the activation that tells you that, yeah, this is not really an area that makes sense to activate for this type of question. Now, is that something that you can generalize? Not always, but there are hints.
Thank you, Andres. So, I want to talk a little bit about the EU AI Act that has become enforceable onto high-risk AI systems, especially on credit scoring, fraud detection, as well as insurance underwriting. So, I think we in Canada has also started having our OSFI 23 and our FIFI 2 that is coming into effect next year. So I like to address this question to Frank. What does he actually think about this? Because I think it just got released on May 1st, 2027. And the key challenge is already being named in the guidance, which is the third-party black box model where limited transparency into underlying algorithm is complicating compliance. So which of your AI system right now that we think, or in your experience, would survive this both audits, EU AI Act as well as OSFI? And how do we actually know? And what would you do? Like, what are the things that we should be getting prepared for? Because the time is coming and the clock is ticking.
So I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but I'm a fan of the EU Act generally. I think Canada had an act on the table during the previous government that was sort of tabled. It went away when Trudeau stepped down, but obviously there's a lot of activity. There's likely to be renewal of this act coming soon, and the Canadian government has taken a lot of inspiration from the GDPR and other European regulation. I think generally it's a good thing. The exact part of the act that you cited, I'm not familiar with, but my feeling is that, again, not being a lawyer, I think a lot of what they do comes down to precedent, and it comes down to sort of not the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law. So it's hard to tell right now what's going to survive or what is not going to survive. It's going to come down to the case and the lawyers and the evidence. I think, this is kind of not legislation, but kind of standards work. Like, I was temporarily part of the ISO subcommittee on AI, and there was grand standards for artificial intelligence and like ISO standards, but it was very superficial, very high level. It's more like the spirit of the thing, and actual like details of the implementation were left to cases. So I think it's going to depend.
Right. So, is there anybody from the audience that would like to ask any questions to the panel? Because I know that Tony from NorthBound has a lot of frameworks and templates that he can actually, help with. I see a hand up there at the corner. Did you have a question? Or no? Oh, okay. I thought he had a question. Anyway, so oh, you do. Okay, cool. Can you please say your name as well as where you're from?
Sure. My name is Abdul Rahman Bakir. I'm from the government of New Brunswick. Part of my work, I oversee the governance and adoption, and I find it very interesting what you said about the 5 levels of guardrails. Actually, it can be governance or compliance layers. I'm just wondering, those layers work in using AI themselves? If they do, then how can we make sure that they don't do the same mistakes the LLM will do? Or it's more of a deterministic system, and if they are, then how can we make sure they can handle the variety and all probabilities of income that can happen?
Yeah, no. So, very valid question. I think only layer 4 that I talked about, where when you get the response and you validate that, but rest everything is mostly our own logic, rules, custom code, or small libraries that we have built over the period of time, and that will keep evolving because the rules will vary industry to industry, organization to organization, use case to use case. So that it's not that it's one in all. We have built that governance framework and it will apply across the board. It's an evolution that will go through. Right now, the use case that we have in hand regarding Helix, that's we started with, but that's the idea and principle that we're gonna follow along. But to answer your question, not everything is AI. AI is only one layer, rest everything is mostly our logic and custom code that we have building on top.
Oh, there's another question?
So my name is Ahmed Al-Aubi. I'm the founder of Adaptive AI, a startup company currently with AI to market. And I had a question for Shahzad about the 5 layers again. And anyone else who might have some insight on it. So you've talked about having the 5 layers act as like filtration layers for the output that goes in from the prompt and then goes out to the user. I've also heard other models being kind of advocated for by other experts in the field of having the layers set up in a way where they act as a board of directors, and each layer has an AI agent mind that kind of advocates for that layer specific guardrails, and then all the layers would talk about the whole prompt, and they would act as a board of directors again, and they would kind of generate an output together that complies with all the layers. So which one is gives you the best output?
I think your answer is in your question already. So I think what you talked about is more like the mechanism, how to make it work. It's a basically an agentic framework that you're talking about that we can make this enablement. And enablement can be either way, but both will work. For example, as I said, um, it's going to evolve use case by use cases, and that's where we have to pick and choose when I'm verifying the input from one LLM to another or one agent to another. So that's all evolution, but yes, it can definitely be done that way.
Okay, so I think, we are really kind of short of time. So, what I'm going to do is um, I want to ask a last question to the panel, kind of like a closing one. And then, because it's going to be lunch, so we all can hang around here and ask questions. I'll keep the fantastic 5 here, I promise you. So, we've moved from accountability to failure to regulation. We emerged for, at least for me, the hardest question is not really the technical, and it's also maybe not really the legal as well. It's really whether people inside your organization and the people that you serve actually trust what you've built and have a stake in what they're building. That's why you're asking about the BOD, right? So I want to pass around this question to the panel, each one of you, that if the organization sitting next to you, your peer, your regulator, your client, asks you tomorrow to prove that your AI systems or the larger ecosystem, is it trustworthy? Is it compliant? Right? What is the one thing that you could hand to them? And what is the one thing that you couldn't? It is not an easy question.
Yeah.
And I'm asking this not just to the panel, but also to the fellow audience here. It's really something for you to ponder upon because it's coming.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have a solid answer because you don't trust it. It's, I told Tony this a while ago. Like when I deal with AI and I take a response from AI, I treat AI like I was talking to myself from 20 years ago. I was overconfident, I was wrong half the time, and I was a little cocky. So that's how I treat the responses back from AI. I don't trust. Like this details have been missed. And all I can point to is that all I can say is that we're getting better. We're putting guardrails in place. Don't just rely on the guardrails that come with ChatGPT and Gemini. If you're an organization that can employ third-party guardrails testing, not just what we do, but other people do what we do as well. Get something in there. Train your staff. Create a mindset of of growth, of just allow people to explore. But there was a comment yesterday. I was at Grimross because I'm there way too much, and that's where a lot of the IT folks tend to hang out in Fredericton. And I was talking with some friends, and one of them was just venting about all week. They were chasing Claude errors. I say Claude. They spent hours and hours, multiple senior developers trying to find out where the code was going wrong. And they traced it down to a junior developer. And they weren't mad. They just wanted to have a conversation with this junior developer and say, hey, what, kind of walk me through your process here, like, your troubleshooting process. Why did you take this code and promote that? And his response was, well, it's not my fault. It was written by Claude. So there's an inherent ethics issue right there with accountability. And that's what I think people need to be on the lookout for. You can't blame your tools. And ultimately, you're accountable. And we need to encourage that line of thinking with our teams.
Shahzad, 60 seconds, okay? We have the 60 seconds game now for everybody.
I will keep it short. So I think what we cannot hand over is the blind trust or blind certainty. I think AI is not about trust or not about perfection. It's about, I will be repeating myself, it's the control and the transparency. And if something goes wrong, how we are going to handle. That's the assurance that we can give with all the transparency and auditability. But the perfection, if you are looking for perfection, then may not be the right answer. And the last thing I will say, it's when you look into all those things, it's very important to look into all those, like what you call it, the guardrail that you're building. Like it's an evolution. You have to start with something,
Yeah.
but not look for the best answer. And ultimate decision still lies with you. So you need to make a judgment call whether I need to pick that answer or not. That's why human in the loop is very, very important.
Thank you, Shahzad. Tony?
Yeah, I'm going to echo what these guys said. Like, humans got to always be in the loop. Wearing my other hat, I'm the CTO of a software company as well. And like Richard was saying, you often get developers that, work collaboratively with Claude Code and they produce a result. And they're moving through code rapidly, way more rapidly than they could before. But that means they're making mistakes and introducing problems more rapidly as well. So like some other people have said, like we employ, when someone builds a new piece of code, they usually do what's called a pull request. And it's usually a process where their peer would review the code just to get a second set of eyes to make sure it looks okay. Because the code's being produced so fast with Claude now, there's usually another step where an adversarial or a different LLM will review the code that one other one did. But we don't take that at face value. We always have the human check it over. So it's almost like an aid, but we never trust the end result. Like, we don't trust that an LLM is going to produce something that matches our architecture, that's secure, that's safe, that's predictable, all that kind of stuff. It's always checked by a human, I guess, and that's where we are right now.
Thank you, Tony. Dr. Rudzicz.
I'm going to say something controversial and protect my species and say that I kind of agree that human in the loop is generally a good idea, but there might be situations in which humans are the source of the problem. I think the bias we see in models comes from biased data, which comes from bias in human processes. And this is where I betray my species. These models are getting pretty performant, and they're starting to really push up against human performance on a lot of decision making. So it's possible, I'm saying, in a few months or years that they will be more performant than us in a lot of scenarios. My answer to the question is two parts. Like, my stakeholders, probably I'd consider like students and colleagues at the university, and I feel that there's a pushback there against large American companies and their LLMs and being forced to use Copilot or ChatGPT and so on. I think if there's an app on the university website that helps direct students to get mental health, they would prefer it if it was kind of built by people on campus, or at least by a Canadian startup. And then there was all kinds of characteristics about where the data are going to be, and they don't trust Google, Microsoft, and so on. I think if we do, this is the last part of the answer, if we do develop our own tools and we want to deploy it and preserve trust, there's already standards, emerging standards for how to document your models. There's two papers that describe them. One is data sheets for data sets by Mitchell, and the other one is, by Tegru. Model cards is the other one. Model cards basically describes, if you're going to deploy a model, when was it trained, by whom, on what hardware, who was their supervisor, et cetera, et cetera. And it's pretty standard. I think it's part of like the ML Flow, ML Ops package. And That's more than like explainability and differential privacy is a route to trustworthiness if you can document it well.
Yep, I'm basically on this camp too. For me, I think there is a wrong assumption, which is humans make better decisions. In my previous role, I was looking at operational risk across international banking, and I had 30 countries that we were looking at, and we encounter all the different types of biases. So sexist people at branches, for example, that had a material impact. So at the end of the day, the question is, as an organization, how do you handle that? Is through processes, through governance. So it is not guaranteed that it's going to be better, but if you're talking about trying to work with, for example, a regulator or anyone that is looking at you saying, how do you guarantee or how can you be trusted, essentially? What you do is you show your work and you say, hey, this is what we are doing to identify when something is going wrong. This is what we do to prevent it from going wrong in the first place. So the actual actions may be slightly different. So for example, when you're talking about people, you will train them, you will do all of those things, and that is perfectly fine. When you're talking about AI, you will do something equivalent, but it will look differently. So overall, that is the part that I actually, in the first question, is about having those structures. So the 3 layers of defense is one of the models, but essentially what you have is a process that allows you to make decisions in an effective way, have some sort of challenge or visibility, so it's not made, those decisions are not being made in isolation. And then the last part is you have a feedback loop to learn, right? So essentially, again, it will look differently, but that is what builds trust.
Thank you, Andre. So, I want to conclude that, what you've actually heard, I mean, the past hour is really the trust and, explainability. There's no one formula that is going to solve this all. And I think everyone on this stage basically described what they have, and almost no one could say that they can be fully accountable for to hand it over and say safely that it's all good. So I think this is a gap, and it should have a name. It's not a compliance gap. It's not a technology gap. I want to call it a trust infrastructure gap almost. And it's something that is going to compound, and it's a very expensive fix, like just what happened to Pizza Hut, right? So, I want to say that our lunchbox maybe is getting cold, but the regulator also might send us a letter. And I think, it's a question that we need to be prepared to answer to, especially to the board when you brought it up. And, we don't have to wait for an expensive lesson is basically what the takeaway is. But I want to keep the Fantastic Five here. It's against the rules. Everybody should be going for lunch, but I want everybody to have, an exchange, or if you have questions and everything, please feel free to stay here. I invite fellow members from the other room to come over here in this room and have a dialogue, and to have the Fantastic Five stay a little bit. But you know what? If nobody is in a hurry for lunch, I'm going to hand the mic over if anybody raises their hands, if you have any questions, or everybody's just eager for your lunchbox. You do have a question, see? Wonderful. But anybody that wants to leave, please feel free, okay? I don't want to hold you back, but thank you. And let's have a round of applause first before everybody leaves the room. All right, thank you.